The soft hum of the Mercedes engine was the only sound keeping Judge Sarah Barnes company as she navigated the familiar curves of Maple Avenue. The digital clock on her dashboard clicked to 9:00 p.m., its gentle blue glow a reminder of another long day serving justice in the city's bustling courthouse. Sarah adjusted her rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of herself, still poised and polished despite the 14-hour workday. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her grandmother's pearls caught the warm glow of the streetlights. She smiled, remembering the day she received them at her law school graduation. "Remember, baby," her grandmother had whispered, "these pearls carried me through the hardest times. Now they'll carry you too." The leather briefcase in the passenger seat was stuffed with case files she needed to review before tomorrow's hearings. A particularly challenging custody battle waited at the top of the pile, one that would require all her wisdom and experience to resolve fairly. Sarah had built her reputation on being thorough, fair, and unafraid to tackle the most difficult cases. As she drove past the elegant homes of Maple Avenue, their windows glowing with warmth, Sarah reflected on her journey. 20 years ago, she'd been a young law clerk, determined to prove herself in a world that often questioned her presence. Now, at 45, she'd earned her place on the bench through unwavering dedication and an unshakable belief in justice for all. The night air was crisp and clear, typical for early autumn. Sarah cracked her window slightly, letting the breeze carry in the scent of blooming jasmine from the neighborhood gardens. She was looking forward to getting home, kicking off her heels, and pouring herself a glass of her favorite Merlot while she worked through her cases. Little did she know that this routine drive home, a journey she'd made hundreds of times before, was about to become anything but ordinary. The quiet night was about to present her with an unexpected opportunity to turn a moment of prejudice into a powerful lesson about dignity, respect, and the possibility of change. The rhythmic flash of blue lights pierced the calm of Sarah's evening, painting the interior of her Mercedes in successive waves of electric blue. She glanced at her speedometer, exactly at the limit, then checked her rearview mirror, where Officer Turner's patrol car loomed close behind. 3 cars passed by in the opposite direction, none of them drawing the officer's attention. Sarah smoothly guided her car to the curb, muscle memory from her years as a prosecutor taking over. Her manicured fingers drummed once on the steering wheel before settling into stillness. The leather seat creaked softly as she reached for her purse, movements deliberate and measured. Through her side mirror, she watched Officer Turner's slow approach, noting how his hand rested near his holster despite the peaceful suburban setting. The memory surfaced unbidden, her father's voice from decades ago, teaching her exactly how to handle moments like these. "Keep your hands visible," he'd instructed. "Speak clearly, move slowly." The lessons had been necessary then, and somehow they still were, even with her title and achievements. Officer Turner's flashlight beam swept across her car's interior, lingering on the briefcase filled with court documents, skimming past her elegant blazer hanging in the back seat. Sarah kept her eyes forward, maintaining her dignified composure, even as she noticed a silver Audi speeding past them well above the limit, drawing no reaction from the officer. "Good evening." Officer Turner's voice carried an edge as he reached her window. His nameplate caught the streetlight. M. Turner, badge number 247. Sarah noted the detail automatically, a habit from her courtroom days. "This is quite a vehicle you're driving tonight." Sarah felt her grandmother's pearls against her neck as she turned slowly to face him. The dash cam she'd installed last year was already recording, its tiny red light, a reminder that everything happens for a reason. Perhaps this moment, this interaction, was meant to be more than just another traffic stop. "Yes, Officer Turner," she replied, her voice carrying the same measured tone she used to calm tense situations in her courtroom. "Is there a problem?" She already knew there wasn't one. At least, not the kind he was looking for. Officer Turner's flashlight beam danced across Sarah's license and registration, casting sharp shadows across her credentials. "Mind explaining what brings you to this neighborhood at this hour?" he asked, his tone suggesting she owed him more than the legal requirements of a traffic stop. Sarah glanced at her dashboard clock, 9:12 p.m., then at the elegant homes lining Maple Avenue, where she'd lived for the past decade. Through her open window, she could hear the Chapman kids playing basketball in their driveway 2 houses down. This was her home, her community, her street. "I live here, Officer Turner," she replied evenly, watching his expression in her side mirror. 3 doors down, the blue house with white trim. She noticed him shift his weight, uncomfortable with her calm certainty. The gold band on his finger caught the light as he gripped her license tighter, studying it with narrowed eyes. A car alarm chirped in the distance, and Sarah used the moment to activate her phone's recording app. Not out of fear, but from years of understanding the importance of documentation. Her grandmother's wisdom echoed in her mind. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply the truth, preserved. "This vehicle," Officer Turner continued, tapping her window frame with his flashlight, "matches the description of one reported in some recent incidents." His pause was deliberate, loaded with unspoken assumptions. Sarah noted how he avoided meeting her eyes now, focusing instead on her Mercedes leather interior and the designer bag in her passenger seat. The moment stretched between them, filled with the weight of hundreds of similar moments across the country. But Sarah wasn't just anyone. She was Judge Sarah Barnes, and she'd spent her career turning difficult moments into opportunities for change. As Officer Turner ran her license through the system, Sarah caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her grandmother's pearls gleamed softly, a reminder of generations of dignity in the face of prejudice. She straightened almost imperceptibly, preparing herself. Soon, he would return with her license, and the real teaching moment would begin, not with anger or accusation, but with the quiet power of earned authority. Officer Turner returned to Sarah's window, his demeanor subtly altered. She watched as his eyes darted between her face and her license, trying to reconcile the information before him. His fingers tapped an uneven rhythm against the leather credential holder, betraying his uncertainty. "Judge Barnes," he said finally, the title catching in his throat. The streetlight above them flickered, casting shifting shadows across his now hesitant expression. Sarah noticed how his hand had dropped away from his holster, how his stance had shifted from aggressive to unsure. "Yes, Officer Turner," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the same measured authority that had guided countless attorneys through her courtroom. "Now, could you please explain the probable cause for this stop?" She held his gaze steadily, the way she'd learned to hold the attention of an entire courtroom. The night air felt charged with possibility. From a nearby house, the sound of a television drifted out, its evening news broadcast a distant murmur. Sarah thought of all the similar scenes playing out across the country tonight, but this one had the potential to be different. The vehicle description. Officer Turner began, then paused, his confident facade crumbling. Sarah could see him struggling to maintain his earlier certainty in the face of her calm questioning. The dashboard camera continued its silent witness, its small red light a reminder that truth had a way of emerging. "Which incident specifically?" Sarah pressed gently, her tone more educational than confrontational. "I'd be very interested in seeing the official reports." Her years on the bench had taught her that transformation often began in these small moments of accountability. Officer Turner shifted his weight again, his police radio crackling with distant chatter. The same silver Audi from earlier sped past them again, still unchallenged. Sarah let the moment hang between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. She reached slowly for her briefcase, drawing out a business card with her chamber's contact information. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting," she suggested, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience in turning difficult moments into opportunities for growth. "My courtroom, tomorrow morning at 9. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the towering courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Judge Sarah Barnes sat in her chambers, reviewing case files while her grandmother's pearls caught the morning light. The gentle ticking of her antique wall clock marked the approaching hour. At precisely 8:55 a.m., a knock echoed through her office. "Come in," she called, her voice carrying the same measured tone from the previous night. Officer Turner entered, his uniform crisp but his shoulders tense. The confidence from the traffic stop had been replaced by uncertainty. "Please, have a seat," Sarah gestured to the leather chair across from her desk. She noticed how his eyes took in the diplomas on her walls, the family photos, the stack of legal volumes, each item telling the story of a life dedicated to justice. "Your Honor, about last night," Officer Turner began, but Sarah raised her hand gently. "Before we discuss that," she said, opening a folder on her desk, "I'd like to share something with you." She slid a photograph across the desk, a young Sarah in her first year of law school, standing proudly next to her father's police cruiser. "My father served on the force for 30 years. Officer Turner's expression shifted as he studied the photo. Sarah continued, her voice carrying warmth rather than accusation. "He taught me that true justice requires us to see beyond our first impressions. Every person who walks into this courtroom has a story, Officer Turner, including you." She stood and walked to her window, looking out over the city they both served. "Last night could have gone many ways," she reflected. "But I believe we have an opportunity here, not just to acknowledge what happened, but to create something meaningful from it." When she turned back, she saw Officer Turner watching her with new eyes. The morning sun highlighted the silver in his hair, the lines of experience on his face. Here was a man who, like her, had chosen a life of public service. The difference was in how they each interpreted that duty. The courtroom hummed with quiet energy as Officer Turner sat in the back row, observing Judge Barnes at work. From his vantage point, he watched as she handled each case with a blend of authority and compassion that commanded respect from everyone present. A young man in an orange jumpsuit stood before her, charged with petty theft. Instead of immediate judgment, Sarah listened intently as he explained about losing his job and trying to feed his family. "Your actions have consequences," she told him firmly, "but your life has value. I'm sentencing you to community service and enrollment in our job training program." Officer Turner leaned forward, noting how the young man's shoulders straightened at her words. He'd arrested dozens like him, but had he ever really seen them? The morning proceeded, each case revealing a new facet of justice he'd never considered. A custody dispute brought both parents to tears. Sarah's voice remained steady as she guided them toward a solution that put their child's needs first. "The easy path is to let anger win," she told them. "The worthy path is to find understanding." Officer Turner thought of his own daughter at home, and something shifted in his perspective. During a brief recess, Sarah noticed Officer Turner taking notes. She'd spotted him doing the same during the proceedings, his pen moving quickly across his notepad. The lessons she'd hoped to convey were taking root in unexpected ways. The final case of the morning involved an elderly woman facing eviction. As the details unfolded, Sarah asked questions that revealed the deeper story. A lifetime of hard work, a medical emergency that drained savings, a landlord who might be persuaded to work out a payment plan. Officer Turner watched as Judge Barnes transformed a potential tragedy into an opportunity for the community to come together. As the courtroom cleared for lunch, Sarah caught Officer Turner's eye. His expression had changed since their encounter the previous night. The defensive armor had cracked, revealing something more human underneath. He nodded slowly, a gesture of emerging respect that went beyond her title or position. In this room, he'd witnessed justice served not through force or fear, but through wisdom and understanding. 2 weeks after the traffic stop, Judge Sarah Barnes stood at the podium in the police academy's main lecture hall. The room was filled with fresh-faced recruits, their blue uniforms crisp and new. But it was Officer Turner, standing confidently beside her, who commanded their attention as he shared the story of that night on Maple Avenue. "I thought I knew what I was seeing," he told his fellow officers, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "But I was looking through a lens clouded by assumptions." Sarah watched the recruits lean forward, drawn in by the rare sight of a veteran officer speaking so openly about his own learning moment. The local news cameras rolled quietly in the background. Sarah had initially hesitated when the story caught media attention, but Officer Turner convinced her that sharing their experience could create ripples of change. "Your Honor," he'd said, "some lessons need to be heard beyond your courtroom." A young female recruit raised her hand. "But how do we balance safety with fairness?" she asked, echoing the question that had sparked heated debates in precincts across the country. Sarah smiled, remembering her father asking the same question years ago. "By remembering that true safety comes from understanding, not fear," Sarah responded, adjusting her grandmother's pearls. "Every person you encounter has a story that matters." Officer Turner nodded, adding, "Our job is to protect and serve everyone, not just those who fit our preconceptions." After the session, Sarah noticed Officer Turner looking at a photo on his phone. His daughter in her high school debate team uniform. "She wants to be a lawyer now," he said quietly. "Says she wants to make a difference like you do." The pride in his voice carried no trace of the bias that had colored their first encounter. The academy's director approached them, tablet in hand. "The video of your presentation is already getting attention," she said excitedly. "Police departments in 3 other cities want to implement similar training programs." Sarah and Officer Turner exchanged glances, both recognizing that their simple traffic stop had become something much larger than themselves. 6 months later, Sarah sat at her favorite corner table in Marie's diner, sipping her Saturday morning coffee. Through the window, autumn leaves danced across Maple Avenue, their golden colors painting the street where everything had changed that night. Her eyes caught a familiar figure entering the diner. Officer Turner held the door for his teenage daughter, Ashley, her debate team jacket proudly displaying her recent state championship pin. They didn't notice Sarah at first as they settled into their booth, Ashley animatedly describing her latest mock trial victory. "The judge liked my argument about equal protection under the law," Ashley's voice carried across the diner. "Just like you taught me, Dad." Sarah smiled behind her coffee cup, remembering the young man she'd sentenced to job training rather than jail, who now worked at this very diner. Officer Turner caught sight of Sarah and nodded respectfully. Their weekly police academy sessions had become a highlight of the department's training program, drawing attention from news outlets and law enforcement agencies nationwide. But it was the smaller changes that meant the most. The way Turner now mentored rookie officers about building trust in all neighborhoods. Sarah watched as he pulled out his phone, showing Ashley a photo from yesterday's ride-along program, where high school students spent a day learning about law enforcement from a new perspective. The pride in his voice was unmistakable as he explained how the program was helping bridge long-standing divides in their community. Later, as Sarah stood to leave, Ashley approached her table. "Judge Barnes, I'm applying to law school next year," she said, her eyes bright with determination. "Dad says you taught him that true justice starts with seeing people as people first. I want to be part of that change." Sarah touched her grandmother's pearls, thinking of all the doors that had opened and closed on her own journey. "The law is a powerful tool," she told Ashley, "but it's our humanity that makes it work." She caught Officer Turner's eye across the diner, both of them knowing that sometimes the most powerful changes start with a simple traffic stop on a quiet evening, and the courage to see beyond first impressions.